dopamine itself is not the reward. It's the buildup to the reward. And the reward has more of a kind of opioid bliss-like property, which itself is not bad if it's endogenous, released from within. But when we can just sit there like the rat with no dopamine, gorging ourselves with pleasures, so to speak, what you end up with is somebody that feels really unmotivated, and those pleasures no longer work to tickle those feel-good circuits. And so there's no reason for them to go out and pursue anything.
It's one thing to choose dopamine instead of here and now because it gives you pleasure, but it can very easily get to the point where you're no longer in control. Dopamine is controlling you.
So how do we use dopamine for focus, motivation, creativity, and avoiding unhealthy addictions?
It's not satiating. It's appetitive.
That's right.
And so it drives you forward. And you might think that being driven forward would be unpleasant, but if you're, in some sense, if you're activating the systems that drive you forward voluntarily, then that's the most positive form of positive reinforcement you can have. I think I read animal researchers who said that when they watched animals who were bar pressing to receive stimulation in those brain areas, the animals would look forward as if something was about to appear that they wanted to have appear.
Incredible.
So that was part of that apprehension. Part of it. So it's a hope system in some sense. Right? It's the elicitation of hope.
That's right. You know, it's dopamine, and here I'm robbing words from others, like my colleague Anna Lemke, who, you know, it's not about having, it's about wanting. It's not about pleasure as much as it is about craving and motivation and drive. If you look at the biochemical cascade, it is dopamine is converted into adrenaline, which is the basis of all energy, all neural energy. And so, including thinking. And so if one is not in a place of being able to set their goal on a particular lofty goal, a graduate degree, a book, et cetera, yet the way one gets to that is by completing things in their immediate environment from start to finish and closing the dopaminergic loop.
Those are at least micro narratives, right? So they're not integrated across a long span of time. But they're not nothing. And so one of the things, well, I did write about this in my first book, particularly about putting your house in perfect order. It's like, well, if you're lost, one of the things you can do is look around and see what direction you could take locally, is fix something.
Epinephrine, which is also adrenaline, those are the same thing, is literally manufactured from the molecule dopamine. That the brain and body communicate is that it's either going to be mechanical or chemical. Let's use the gut as an example. Your stomach can feel acidic, or it can feel nice and warm and fuzzy, whatever that is in a chemical sense. Your heart rate can feel like it's going at a rate that's appropriate for your circumstances. You know, if you're running, it could be quick. And if you're sitting in a chair quietly at the doctor's office waiting to be called back there and all of a sudden your heart starts racing, then you would think, well, that's appropriate for that situation, but it's not uncomfortable, right? It's out of sync with what you are doing, which is sitting. So there's mechanical information, and then there's chemical information. And with respect to your lungs, you know, you can feel like you're out of air or you have plenty of air. You can feel like your breathing is labored or it's easy, or in the chemical sense that the air that you're breathing, your lungs are burning or it feels easy to breathe. So basically there's chemical and mechanical signaling from the body to the brain.
You were talking earlier on about the fact that dopamine can be released when you set yourself a little goal and then achieve it. And one of the ways that you encourage your grad students is to give them a little bit of reward earlier on so that it keeps them motivated. Is this the same mentality that works during an endurance event when you want to say, I'm just got to get myself to the next lamppost, I've just got to get myself to that hill over there? Is that the same dynamic?
Yeah, we can call it milestoning. You just set some milestone. And the key thing here is that, and this is the beauty of the dopamine system, just like the stress system is generic, the fear system is generic. It's designed for a bunch of different scenarios. The motivation system is also generic. It can be to achieve the next lamppost as a milestone, or it can be 5 miles as the next milestone. You get to control that. And so it's completely arbitrary. You realize is that capturing the reward is wonderful, but attaching dopamine to the reward is actually a little bit dangerous.
Attaching.
Yeah,
this is
celebrating the win more than the pursuit, it actually sets you up for failure in the future. And so this gets us right into something called dopamine reward prediction error. And reward prediction error is basically if you expect something to be really great, and then it's not quite that great, your dopamine baseline lowers. And now understanding what we know about dopamine, that means that not only did you feel as if you lost because it wasn't as much a celebration as you thought it would be, but it also means that you're starting from a lower place, meaning you are less motivated.
You've not been stimulating dopamine naturally. You've been basically taking a whip to the brain and forcing it to deliver that dopamine, and you exhaust its stores.
Really?
And so when you come down, you're dopamine deprived, and that's a horrible feeling.
What happens when you're dopamine deprived?
Let me give you a sense of how it feels. And this is just a little tiny trivial example. Every morning you go to the bakery and you get a cup of coffee and a croissant, okay? And that's your habit. In the beginning, it gave you dopamine, right? Because it was new. But only novelty can give you dopamine. After a while, it becomes the same old, same old. All right, so you're standing in line for your croissant and your coffee. Suddenly your phone rings and someone's like, drop whatever you're doing and get over here right now. And you get no croissant and coffee that day. In the brain, dopamine is shutting down and it's making you feel resentful and deprived.
That you didn't get what you wanted.
Yep, what you expected.
Interesting.
Yeah. So that's how it feels to have a dopamine deficiency. You feel resentful and deprived.
The craving as its own internally released drug, this thing dopamine, that is a source of motivation. If people can do what you do, they're going to be in a much better position in life. Doesn't matter if it's school, sport, relationship, any domain of life. If you can start to register, that craving and that friction and that desire, that almost kind of low level of agitation, sometimes high level of agitation, that is that I'm trying to impose my will on the world in a benevolent way, we hope, that's dopamine. It's working with its close cousin, which is epinephrine, which is adrenaline. They are very close cousins. In fact, dopamine manufactures epinephrine. A lot of people don't know this, but adrenaline is actually made from the molecule dopamine. Okay, so those two are hanging out together. It's like crave and work, crave and work. And then you get the win. And some people allow the big peak in dopamine to be associated with the win. And smart people learn to adjust their celebration internally, right? This is all internal. You could throw the biggest party in the world, but as long as you're kind of laid back and looking at this, not letting yourself get manic crazy, you won't necessarily crash as hard, and pretty soon your system will reset. Well, rather than going out and spiking your dopamine again, just wait. Understand that the scale will reset again. Give yourself a few days where you're going to feel a little to continue to manufacture adrenaline and keep going. And the extent to which that can continue is no one will ever know. I do believe that humans have a tremendous capacity to endure and persist, but that few human beings actually know how to tap into that system except under conditions of extreme survival.
You could do that would make things better that you would do. And there's a humility in that too, because especially if you're in a low energy state, it's like, oh my God, I don't have enough energy to make dinner. It's like, do you have enough energy to put a fork on the table? And sometimes people are so depressed that that's really all they can do. It's like, can you take a small step forward, no matter how small that is?
And the ability to generate dopamine and adrenaline is what allows people to persist and live longer. There's no question about that.